The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine corridors of the London clinic as Carole Middleton sat in the passenger seat of the sleek black car, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her handbag. The familiar weight of worry pressed against her chest, making each breath feel deliberate and measured. Through the tinted windows, she watched the bustling streets of central London pass by in a blur of morning commuters and red double-decker buses, but her mind was entirely focused on what lay ahead. Michael reached over and gently squeezed her hand, his weathered fingers providing a momentary anchor in the storm of emotions swirling within her. They had been married for over 4 decades, and he could read the subtle signs of her distress like a well-worn book. The way her shoulders tensed when she was trying to appear strong, the slight quiver in her voice when she spoke about their daughter's condition, and the dark circles under her eyes that spoke of countless sleepless nights. "She's going to be fine, love," he whispered, his voice carrying the same reassuring tone he had used when their children were small and needed comfort after scraped knees or broken toys. But this was different. This wasn't a childhood mishap that could be healed with a plaster and a kiss. This was their Catherine, their eldest daughter, lying in a hospital bed after undergoing serious abdominal surgery. Carole nodded slowly, though her eyes remained fixed on the approaching hospital building. The imposing Victorian facade seemed to loom larger with each passing second, its red brick walls and tall windows reflecting the morning light in a way that felt both welcoming and intimidating. She had driven past this building countless times over the years, never imagining that one day she would be entering it under such circumstances. The car pulled smoothly into the private entrance, away from the prying eyes of photographers and curious onlookers who had been gathering since news of Catherine's surgery had broken. The driver, a kind man named Thomas who had been with the family for several years, turned in his seat with a gentle smile. "Take all the time you need, Mrs. Middleton," he said softly. "I'll be waiting right here for whenever you're ready to leave." Carole managed a weak smile in return, grateful for the small acts of kindness that seemed to shine brighter during dark moments. She took a deep breath, the crisp January air filling her lungs as Michael opened her door and offered his arm for support. Together, they walked through the discreet entrance, their footsteps echoing softly on the polished marble floors. The private wing of the hospital was quieter than she had expected, with thick carpets muffling sounds and warm lighting creating an atmosphere more reminiscent of a luxury hotel than a medical facility. But beneath the elegant facade, the unmistakable scent of disinfectant and the distant sounds of medical equipment served as constant reminders of where they were and why they had come. A nurse approached them with a warm, professional smile. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun, her demeanor immediately putting Carole at ease. "Mrs. Middleton? I'm Sarah, Catherine's primary nurse. She's been asking for you." The words sent a mixture of relief and anxiety through Carole's heart. Relief that her daughter was conscious and well enough to ask for visitors, but anxiety about what state she might find her in. Throughout Catherine's life, from childhood illnesses to the pressures of royal duties, Carole had always been able to fix things, to make them better with her presence and care. But this felt different, more serious, more beyond her control. "How is she?" Carole asked, her voice barely above a whisper as they walked down the hallway. The walls were lined with beautiful artwork and fresh flowers, clear attempts to create a calming environment for patients and their families. "She's doing very well, all things considered," Sarah replied, her tone professional but reassuring. "The surgery went exactly as planned, and she's been resting comfortably. She's still experiencing some discomfort, which is completely normal, but her spirits are good. She's been worried about you, actually. She knows how much you worry." A small laugh escaped Carole's lips, the first genuine sound of mirth she had made in days. Of course Catherine would be worried about everyone else, even while recovering from surgery. It was so typical of her daughter, always putting others before herself, always concerned about how her situation might affect those she loved. They paused outside a door marked with a small, discreet number. Sarah turned to face them both, her expression gentle but serious. "She may seem a bit tired, and she's still connected to some monitoring equipment, but please don't let that alarm you. Everything is functioning exactly as it should. She's been looking forward to seeing you." Michael squeezed Carole's shoulder as Sarah quietly knocked on the door and pushed it open. The room beyond was spacious and filled with natural light from large windows overlooking a peaceful courtyard garden. Fresh flowers adorned every available surface, their vibrant colors creating a cheerful contrast to the clinical environment. And there, propped up against pristine white pillows, was Catherine. Carole's breath caught in her throat as she took in the sight of her eldest daughter. Catherine's normally radiant complexion was pale, and there were dark circles under her eyes that spoke of pain and exhaustion. But, when she saw her parents enter the room, her face immediately brightened with a smile that, while weaker than usual, was unmistakably Catherine. "Mummy," she said softly, her voice slightly hoarse but filled with genuine joy at seeing her mother. The carefully constructed emotional barriers that Carole had built over the past few days crumbled in an instant. Tears that she had been holding back for what felt like an eternity began to flow freely down her cheeks as she rushed to her daughter's bedside. All the fear, the worry, the helplessness she had felt since receiving the phone call about the surgery came pouring out in a torrent of emotion. "Oh, my darling girl," she whispered, carefully taking Catherine's hand in both of hers, mindful of the 4-line and monitoring wires. The hand felt warm and real and alive, confirmation that her daughter was truly going to be okay. Catherine's own eyes welled up with tears as she saw her mother's emotional state. Even in her weakened condition, her first instinct was to comfort and reassure. "I'm okay, Mummy. Really, I am. The doctors say everything went perfectly." But Carole could see beyond the brave facade that Catherine was maintaining. She could see the pain her daughter was trying to hide, the exhaustion that came from battling both physical discomfort and the emotional toll of being in the public eye during such a vulnerable time. She could see the young girl who used to crawl into her parents' bed during thunderstorms, who needed her mother's comfort and protection. "You don't have to be strong for me," Carole said, gently stroking Catherine's hair, which was clean but lacking its usual glossy perfection. "You've been through something frightening and painful, and it's okay to admit that." For a moment, Catherine's composure wavered, and she allowed herself to be simply a daughter in need of her mother's comfort rather than a public figure who needed to maintain appearances. "I was scared," she admitted quietly. "When they were wheeling me into surgery, all I could think about was George and Charlotte and Louis. I kept thinking about all the things I haven't taught them yet, all the bedtime stories I haven't read." The words broke Carole's heart even further. She thought about her 3 beloved grandchildren, who had been staying with her and Michael during Catherine's hospital stay. They knew their mother was in the hospital, but they were too young to fully understand the gravity of the situation. She had spent hours answering their innocent questions about when Mummy would come home, trying to maintain a cheerful demeanor while her own heart was breaking with worry. "The children are perfectly fine," she assured Catherine, settling into the comfortable chair beside the bed. "George has been helping Papa with the garden planning for spring, and Charlotte has been teaching Louis how to make proper tea. They've been such good helpers, and they send their love." A genuine smile crossed Catherine's face at the mention of her children. Despite her weakened state, the love and pride she felt for them was evident in her expression. "I miss them terribly. I know they're too young to visit here, but I just want to hold them." Michael, who had been quietly standing near the window to give his wife and daughter space for their reunion, moved closer to the bed. His own eyes were misty with emotion, though he was trying to maintain his composure for both women. He had always been the steady presence in the family, the one who remained calm in crisis situations, but seeing his eldest daughter in a hospital bed was testing even his considerable emotional reserves. "They understand that you need to rest and get better," he said gently. "We've been reading them extra bedtime stories and telling them all about how brave their mummy is." The next few minutes passed in comfortable conversation as Catherine shared details about her surgery and recovery process, carefully editing out the more frightening or painful aspects to spare her parents additional worry. She spoke about the excellent care she was receiving, the kind messages from friends and family, and her hopes for a swift recovery. But, as the conversation continued, Carole found herself studying every detail of her daughter's appearance and demeanor, looking for signs of how she was truly feeling. It was a habit she had developed when Catherine was small, this ability to read between the lines and understand what her children needed even when they couldn't or wouldn't express it directly. She noticed how Catherine shifted slightly every few minutes, seeking a more comfortable position. She saw the brief flickers of discomfort that crossed her face when she moved too quickly. She observed the way her daughter's energy seemed to ebb and flow, requiring periods of rest between conversations. "Are you in much pain, darling?" she asked gently, her maternal instincts overriding any concern about overstepping boundaries. Catherine hesitated for a moment, clearly debating whether to minimize her discomfort or be honest. "It's manageable," she finally said. "The medication helps, and the doctors say it's normal after this type of surgery. Some days are better than others." Carole nodded, understanding the subtext. Her daughter was experiencing significant discomfort but was trying to be brave and not worry her family unnecessarily. It was such a Catherine response, always thinking of others first. A soft knock on the door interrupted their conversation, and Sarah entered carrying a tray with tea and light refreshments. "I thought you might all enjoy some proper tea," she said with a knowing smile. "Nothing fancy, but I know how important a good cup of tea can be during difficult times." The simple gesture touched Carole deeply. In all the complexity and formality of royal life, sometimes the most meaningful moments came from small acts of human kindness. She watched as Sarah carefully arranged the tea service, noting how naturally the nurse interacted with Catherine, treating her as a person rather than a public figure. As they shared tea together, the hospital room began to feel less clinical and more like a gathering place for family. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting warm patterns on the white walls and highlighting the beautiful flowers that friends and well-wishers had sent. Catherine seemed to gain strength from her parents' presence, sitting up a bit straighter and engaging more animatedly in conversation. She asked about news from home, about friends and neighbors, about the ordinary details of life that had continued moving forward while she had been focused on surgery and recovery. Mrs. Patterson from the village sent the most beautiful card, Carole shared, pulling a handful of messages from her handbag. "She said to tell you that everyone at the church is praying for your speedy recovery." The mention of their home community brought another smile to Catherine's face. Despite the changes that royal life had brought to their family, the connections to their roots in Berkshire remained strong and meaningful. As the afternoon wore on, Carole found herself relaxing for the first time in days. Seeing Catherine alert and comfortable, surrounded by evidence of love and support from around the world, helped ease the crushing weight of worry she had been carrying. But she also recognized that this was just the beginning of what would likely be a long recovery process. "How long do you think you'll need to stay here?" she asked, already mentally planning how she could best support her daughter during the weeks ahead. "The doctors think at least another week, possibly 2, Catherine replied. "They want to make sure everything is healing properly before I go home. And then, it will be several more weeks of rest before I can return to any official duties." Carole nodded, her mind already working through the logistics of caring for the grandchildren, coordinating with royal staff, and ensuring that Catherine had everything she needed for a complete recovery. She had raised 3 children and helped them through countless challenges, but this felt different because of the public nature of Catherine's life and the additional pressures that came with royal responsibilities. As evening approached and visiting hours began to wind down, Carole reluctantly prepared to leave. The emotional reunion had been everything she had hoped for and more, but parting from Catherine felt almost unbearable. "We'll be back tomorrow," she promised, carefully embracing her daughter while being mindful of surgical sites and medical equipment. "I love you, Mummy," Catherine whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for being here. It means everything." "I love you too, my darling girl," Carole replied, her voice breaking slightly. "More than you'll ever know." As they walked back through the hospital corridors toward their waiting car, Carole felt emotionally drained but also strangely hopeful. Seeing Catherine alert and recovering had eased her worst fears, but it had also reinforced just how precious and fragile life could be. The evening air was crisp and cold as they stepped outside, and Carole pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders. London's lights were beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk, and the city seemed to be settling into its evening rhythm. "She's going to be fine," Michael said quietly as Thomas opened the car door for them. "Our Catherine is stronger than she knows." Carole nodded, though she knew the road ahead would be challenging. Recovery from major surgery was never simple, and the added pressures of public life would make it even more complex. But, for tonight, it was enough to know that her daughter was alive, alert, and surrounded by love. As they drove through the London streets toward home, Carole's mind was already turning to tomorrow's visit and all the ways she could continue supporting her family through this difficult time. The tears she had shed at Catherine's bedside had been both an ending and a beginning and release of the fear she had been carrying and the start of a new chapter focused on healing and recovery. The hospital visit had changed something fundamental in her understanding of what it meant to be Catherine's mother in this new phase of their lives. It wasn't just about the ordinary challenges of parenting adult children anymore. It was about navigating the unique pressures and responsibilities that came with royal life while maintaining the core bonds of family love that had always sustained them. Tonight, she would return to the grandchildren who were waiting for news about their mother, and she would be able to reassure them with genuine confidence that Mummy was going to be perfectly fine. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and continued recovery, but, for now, the most important thing had been accomplished. She had seen her daughter, held her hand, and confirmed that their family bond remained as strong as ever. 3 days had passed since Carole's first emotional visit to see Catherine, and each subsequent day had brought subtle improvements in her daughter's condition. The initial shock and overwhelming worry had given way to a more manageable routine of daily visits, careful monitoring of Catherine's progress, and the gradual rebuilding of confidence that recovery was truly underway. This morning felt different somehow, lighter perhaps, as Carole prepared for another day at the hospital. The winter sunlight streaming through her bedroom windows at the family home in Bucklebury seemed brighter, and the usual weight of anxiety that had settled in her chest over the past week felt less oppressive. Michael was already downstairs preparing breakfast, the familiar sounds of domestic routine providing a comforting backdrop to her morning preparations. She selected her clothing carefully, as she had every day since Catherine's surgery. Nothing too formal that might suggest she was treating this as a public appearance, but nothing too casual that might be inappropriate for a hospital visit. A comfortable navy sweater, practical shoes for walking hospital corridors, and her favorite scarf that Catherine had given her for Christmas several years ago. In the kitchen, Michael had laid out a proper breakfast spread, though Carole's appetite remained inconsistent. The stress of the past week had affected her eating habits, and she found herself forcing down meals more out of necessity than genuine hunger. This morning, however, the smell of fresh coffee and warm toast actually seemed appealing. "How are you feeling about today?" Michael asked, settling into his chair across from her with his own cup of coffee. The morning light highlighted the lines of worry that had deepened around his eyes over the past week, reminders that this ordeal had been difficult for him too, even though he processed stress differently than she did. "Better," Carole replied honestly, spreading marmalade on her toast with more enthusiasm than she had shown for food in days. "Yesterday she seemed so much stronger, and the doctors are pleased with how quickly she's healing. I think we're finally moving in the right direction." The improvement in Catherine's condition had been gradual but steady. Each day brought small victories, sitting up more comfortably, walking a few more steps, eating slightly larger meals, engaging in longer conversations without obvious fatigue. More importantly, the spark was returning to Catherine's eyes, that unmistakable vitality that had always been such a central part of her personality. After breakfast, they drove through the familiar countryside toward London, the journey that had become their daily routine. Carole found herself noticing details that had escaped her attention during those first terrifying days, the way frost decorated the bare branches of winter trees, the peaceful beauty of fields waiting for spring, the gradual transformation from rural landscapes to suburban neighborhoods and, finally, to the bustling heart of London. At the hospital, Sarah greeted them with an unusually bright smile. "She's had an excellent night," the nurse reported as she escorted them through the now familiar corridors. "Her pain levels are much more manageable, and she's been asking when you would arrive. I think she has some news to share." The anticipation in Sarah's voice sparked curiosity in Carole. Over the past few days, she had learned to read the subtle cues from medical staff, understanding that their tone and demeanor often provided valuable insights into Catherine's progress before she even entered the room. When they arrived at Catherine's room, the difference was immediately apparent. Catherine was sitting fully upright in a comfortable chair by the window rather than propped up in bed, and she was dressed in her own pajamas rather than a hospital gown. Her hair was styled, she was wearing light makeup, and there was an energy about her that had been missing since the surgery. "Mummy, Papa," she called out as they entered, her voice stronger and more animated than it had been all week. "I have wonderful news." Carole felt a surge of relief and joy at seeing her daughter looking so much more like herself. The pale, fragile patient of a few days ago had been replaced by someone who, while still clearly recovering, radiated the warmth and vitality that everyone who knew Catherine had come to expect. "You look absolutely wonderful," Carole said, settling into the chair beside Catherine's. "What's this news you want to share?" "The doctors think I might be able to go home by the end of the week," Catherine announced, her excitement evident despite her attempts to maintain composure. "They're very pleased with how everything is healing, and they believe I'll be more comfortable continuing my recovery at Adelaide Cottage." The news felt like a weight being lifted from Carole's shoulders. While she had known intellectually that Catherine's surgery had been successful and that recovery was progressing normally, the prospect of her daughter returning home made the improvement feel real and permanent in a way that hospital visits could not. "That's wonderful news, darling," Michael said, his own relief evident in his voice. "The children will be absolutely thrilled. They've been asking every day when they'll be able to see you at home." At the mention of her children, Catherine's expression became particularly tender. The separation from George, Charlotte, and Louis had been one of the most difficult aspects of her hospital stay, and Carole knew that being reunited with them was a powerful motivator for her recovery. "How have they been handling everything?" Catherine asked, settling back in her chair. I know you and Mummy have been wonderful with them, but I worry about how they're processing all of this. Carole smiled, remembering the resilience and adaptability that children so often displayed in challenging circumstances. They've been remarkable, honestly. George has been very protective and mature, clearly understanding that something serious was happening but trying to be brave for his siblings. Charlotte has been her usual caring self, wanting to help with everything and asking thoughtful questions about when you'll be better. And Louis has been his delightful, energetic self, keeping everyone's spirits up with his enthusiasm for life. The conversation naturally shifted to family updates and news from home. Carole shared stories about the children's daily activities, their questions and concerns, and their excitement about their mother's impending return. She described how George had been helping plan special activities for when Catherine came home, how Charlotte had been drawing pictures and writing notes for her mother, and how Louis had been practicing his reading so he could show off his progress. As they talked, Carole noticed that Catherine was able to maintain her energy and focus for much longer periods than during previous visits. The conversation flowed more naturally, and there were longer stretches where the reality of being in a hospital seemed to fade into the background. "There's something else I wanted to discuss with you," Catherine said after they had covered family news. Her tone became slightly more serious, though not alarming. "The doctors and I have been talking about my recovery timeline and when I might be able to resume official duties." This was a conversation that Carole had been both anticipating and dreading. She understood that Catherine's role as a senior member of the royal family came with responsibilities that couldn't be indefinitely postponed, but her maternal instincts wanted to insist on a complete and unhurried recovery regardless of external pressures. "What are they recommending?" she asked, trying to keep her voice neutral rather than reveal her concerns about Catherine returning to public life too quickly. "They're being very conservative, which I appreciate," Catherine replied. "No official engagements for at least 6 to 8 weeks, possibly longer depending on how I progress. And when I do return, it will be gradually, starting with less physically demanding activities and building up slowly." The timeline sounded reasonable to Carole, though she secretly hoped it might be extended even further if necessary. She had seen too often how the demands of royal life could overwhelm even the strongest individuals, and she wanted to ensure that Catherine was truly ready before facing those pressures again. "That sounds very sensible," Michael commented. "The most important thing is making sure you're completely healed before taking on additional stress." Catherine nodded, though Carole could see that she was already thinking about the various commitments and projects that would be waiting for her return. "There are several causes that I'm particularly eager to get back to, especially the early childhood development work. But I know I need to be patient and listen to my body." They spent the next hour discussing practical aspects of Catherine's return home, the arrangements that would need to be made for continued medical care, the modifications to her daily routine during recovery, and the gradual reintroduction of normal family activities. It was a planning session that felt hopeful and forward-looking rather than crisis management. A gentle knock on the door interrupted their conversation, and a different nurse entered carrying a large vase of fresh flowers. "These just arrived for you," she said, setting them on a table already crowded with floral arrangements and cards from well-wishers around the world. The flowers were particularly beautiful, a mixed arrangement of spring blooms that seemed to bring the promise of warmer weather and new growth into the hospital room. Catherine read the accompanying card with a smile. "They're from the team at the Royal Foundation," she explained. "Such a thoughtful message about taking the time I need to heal properly." Carole was struck by how the constant stream of flowers, cards, and messages seemed to genuinely lift Catherine's spirits. Each delivery was a reminder that she was loved and missed by countless people, from family members to colleagues to members of the public who had been touched by her work over the years. As the afternoon progressed, they were joined by William, who had been dividing his time between his own responsibilities, caring for the children, and visiting Catherine. His arrival brought a different energy to the room, the easy familiarity of a long marriage, mixed with obvious relief at seeing his wife looking so much better. Carole watched the interaction between her daughter and son-in-law with the satisfaction of a mother who had seen her child find genuine happiness in marriage. Even in the hospital setting, with Catherine still recovering from surgery, there was a natural comfort and affection between them that spoke to the strength of their relationship. "The children send their love," William reported, settling into a chair near Catherine's. "They've been making cards and drawings for you every day. George has been particularly focused on creating what he calls recovery art that's supposed to help you feel better." Catherine laughed, the first genuinely carefree laugh Carole had heard from her all week. "I can't wait to see everything they've created. And I can't wait to hold them again." They can't wait either, William replied. George asked me this morning if he could come to the hospital to help take care of you. He's very worried about making sure you're comfortable when you come home. The conversation turned to practical arrangements for Catherine's homecoming. There were medical considerations about equipment and care that would need to be available at Adelaide Cottage, security arrangements that would need to be adjusted, and family logistics about resuming normal routines while accommodating Catherine's recovery needs. Carole found herself taking mental notes about ways she could continue supporting the family during this transition. The children would need extra attention and reassurance as their mother recovered, and Catherine would benefit from having additional help with daily tasks until she regained her full strength. I hope you know that we'll be available for whatever you need, she said to Catherine and William. Whether it's helping with the children, bringing meals, or just being an extra pair of hands around the house. We're so grateful for everything you've already done, Catherine replied, reaching over to squeeze her mother's hand. Having you and Papa caring for the children during all of this has given me such peace of mind. I don't know how we would have managed without you. The gratitude in Catherine's voice touched Carole deeply. Throughout her daughter's adult life, she had sometimes wondered about her role and how much help to offer, particularly given the unique circumstances of royal life. But this crisis had clarified that fundamental family bonds transcended titles and public roles, and that being a mother and grandmother remained her most important responsibilities. As the afternoon began to fade into evening, the conversation naturally became quieter and more reflective. Catherine's energy was still good, but she was beginning to show subtle signs of fatigue that indicated visiting time should probably end soon. I want you to know how much these visits have meant to me, Catherine said, looking at both her parents with obvious emotion. Those first few days after surgery, when everything felt uncertain and frightening, having you here made all the difference. Just knowing that you were nearby, that you would be here no matter what happened, gave me strength I didn't even know I needed. Carole felt tears welling up in her eyes again, though this time they were tears of relief and gratitude rather than fear and worry. There's nowhere else we would rather be, she replied. You're our daughter, and we love you. That doesn't change because of titles or public roles or anything else. The simplicity and truth of that statement seemed to resonate deeply with Catherine. In a world where so many relationships were complicated by protocol, public expectations, and formal requirements, the unconditional love of family provided an anchor of authenticity and support. As they prepared to leave for the day, Carole felt a profound sense of closure about this phase of Catherine's recovery. The worst fears had been faced and overcome, the initial crisis had passed, and they were now in the hopeful territory of healing and return to normal life. The drive home through London's evening traffic felt different than previous days. Instead of anxious anticipation about what they might find at the hospital, there was comfortable satisfaction about the progress they had witnessed and optimistic planning for the days ahead. She really is going to be fine, isn't she? Carole said to Michael as they navigated the familiar route home. Better than fine, he replied with confidence. She's going to be stronger than ever. Sometimes facing something difficult like this reminds us of what really matters and what we're truly capable of. That evening, as Carole helped the grandchildren prepare for bed, their questions about their mother took on a different tone. Instead of worried uncertainty, there was excited anticipation about her return home and eager planning for special things they wanted to do together once she was feeling better. When Mummy comes home, can we have a special tea party in the garden? Charlotte asked as Carole brushed her hair before bed. I think that sounds like a wonderful idea, Carole replied. But we'll need to wait until she's feeling completely better and the weather is a bit warmer. I'm going to read her my favorite story, George announced from his bed across the room. The one about the brave knight who saves the kingdom. I think she'll like it because she's brave too. Their innocent confidence in their mother's recovery and their natural resilience in the face of family crisis reminded Carole once again of the remarkable strength that children possessed. They had accepted the temporary disruption to their routine with grace, trusted the adults around them to handle the serious matters, and maintained their fundamental optimism about life returning to normal. As she tucked them into bed with extra hugs and longer bedtime stories than usual, Carole reflected on how this experience had deepened her appreciation for every aspect of family life. The ordinary moments that she might have taken for granted before bedtime routines, family meals, casual conversations, now felt precious and significant. Later that evening, as she and Michael sat in their quiet living room, Carole felt a peace that had been absent for over a week. Catherine's recovery was progressing beautifully, the grandchildren were thriving despite the disruption, and the family bonds that mattered most had proven their strength under pressure. tomorrow would bring another hospital visit, more progress to celebrate, and continued steps toward Catherine's return home. But tonight, for the first time since this ordeal began, Carole felt genuinely confident that everything was going to be not just fine, but better than before. The morning of Catherine's discharge from the London clinic dawned bright and clear, with the kind of crisp winter sunshine that seemed to promise better days ahead. Carole had awakened earlier than usual, her mind already busy with the dozens of small details that would need attention as Catherine transitioned from hospital care to recovery at home. But, beneath the practical concerns, there was an underlying excitement that she hadn't felt in nearly 2 weeks. Her daughter was finally coming home. Michael had been up even earlier, preparing what he insisted on calling a proper celebration breakfast for the grandchildren, who would finally be reunited with their mother later that day. The sounds of activity in the kitchen below, the gentle clatter of dishes, the whistle of the kettle, the soft hum of the radio, provided a comforting soundtrack to Carole's morning preparations. She had spent considerable time the previous evening coordinating with royal staff, medical personnel, and family members to ensure that Catherine's homecoming would be as smooth and stress-free as possible. Adelaide Cottage had been prepared with everything necessary for continued recovery, from medical equipment to meal planning to security adjustments that would allow for the increased privacy Catherine would need during the coming weeks. The grandchildren had been beside themselves with excitement when they learned that today would be the day their mother finally came home. George had insisted on making a special welcome home banner with his siblings, Charlotte had spent hours preparing a collection of get well cards and small gifts, and Louis had practiced reading aloud so he could perform for his mother when she arrived. "Are you ready for this?" Michael asked as Carole came downstairs, dressed in her favorite burgundy coat and carrying a bag packed with items Catherine had requested from home, her own pillows, comfortable clothing, and photographs of the children to replace the standard hospital room decor. "More than ready," she replied, accepting the cup of coffee he offered and feeling genuinely enthusiastic about food for the first time in weeks. "I'd been dreaming about this day since she first went into surgery." The drive to London felt different this morning, charged with anticipation rather than anxiety. They passed familiar landmarks that had become part of their daily routine over the past 2 weeks, but today these sights represented the end of a difficult chapter rather than another day of uncertainty and worry. At the hospital, the atmosphere was noticeably lighter. Staff members who had become familiar faces during Catherine's stay greeted them with warm smiles and congratulations. The same corridors that had felt intimidating and sterile during those first frightening visits now seemed welcoming, populated by people who had provided excellent care during a challenging time. Sarah, Catherine's primary nurse, met them with obvious satisfaction about her patient's progress. "She's been ready to go home since dawn," she reported with a laugh. "I don't think I've ever seen a patient more eager to be discharged. She's been packed and waiting for hours." They found Catherine in her room, fully dressed in comfortable casual clothes and sitting in the chair by the window with her belongings neatly organized nearby. She looked radiant, not just healthier than she had during the worst days of her recovery, but actually glowing with happiness and anticipation. "Finally," she exclaimed as her parents entered. "I was beginning to think this day would never come." The difference in her appearance and energy was remarkable. The pale, fragile patient of 2 weeks ago had been completely replaced by someone who, while still moving carefully and obviously mindful of her recent surgery, radiated vitality and eagerness to return to normal life. "You look absolutely wonderful, darling," Carole said, embracing her daughter carefully but enthusiastically. "Are you feeling as good as you look?" "Better than I have in weeks," Catherine replied honestly. "I'm still a bit tender, and I know I need to take things slowly for a while, but I feel like myself again. And I'm desperate to see the children and sleep in my own bed and just be home." The discharge process involved several consultations with medical staff, final instructions about continued care, and arrangements for follow-up appointments. Catherine's surgeon, a distinguished gentleman with a reassuring manner, provided detailed guidance about activity restrictions, medication schedules, and warning signs to watch for during recovery. "You've been an exemplary patient," he told Catherine as they concluded their final meeting. "Your positive attitude and compliance with medical recommendations have definitely contributed to your excellent progress. Just remember that healing continues for several more weeks, so don't be tempted to do too much too quickly." "I promise to be patient," Catherine replied, though Carole could see the effort it required for her naturally active daughter to accept continued limitations on her activities. As they prepared to leave the hospital, several staff members stopped by to say goodbye and wish Catherine well. It was clear that she had made an impression during her stay, not as a celebrity patient requiring special treatment, but as a genuinely kind and grateful person who had treated everyone with respect and warmth despite her own discomfort. The journey from hospital to car was Catherine's longest walk since surgery, and Carole watched carefully for signs of fatigue or discomfort. But Catherine moved with confidence, clearly eager to leave the medical environment behind and begin the next phase of recovery in the comfort and familiarity of home. The car ride to Adelaide Cottage was filled with animated conversation as Catherine caught up on family news, neighborhood happenings, and the ordinary details of life that had continued during her hospital stay. She seemed hungry for these normal connections, eager to re-establish her place in the rhythms of daily family life. The children have been so excited about today, Carole shared as they drove through the countryside toward Windsor. George has been planning special activities for when you're feeling up to them, Charlotte has prepared what she calls a recovery concert of songs to sing for you, and Louis has been practicing his reading every day so he can show you his progress. Catherine's eyes filled with happy tears at the description of her children's preparations. I can't wait to hold them. It feels like it's been months since I've been able to give them proper hugs. As they approached Adelaide Cottage, Carole could see that careful preparations had been made for Catherine's return. The grounds looked particularly well maintained, with early spring bulbs beginning to emerge in the garden beds and everything arranged to create a welcoming, peaceful environment for recovery. The moment their car pulled into the drive, the front door burst open and 3 small figures came racing out, followed by William, who was trying to remind them to be gentle with their mother. But the joy on Catherine's face as she saw her children running toward her made it clear that no amount of caution could have suppressed this reunion. Mummy! Mummy, they called out in unison, their voices filled with pure happiness and relief. Catherine carefully got out of the car and knelt down to embrace all 3 children at once, tears streaming down her face as she held them close. The sight was so moving that Carole felt her own eyes filling with tears, not the worried tears of recent weeks, but tears of joy at witnessing such a perfect moment of family reunion. I missed you all so much, Catherine whispered to her children, holding them as tightly as her healing body would allow. Every day in the hospital, all I wanted was to come home to you. The children's reaction was everything Carole had hoped for. They were clearly thrilled to have their mother back, chattering excitedly about everything they wanted to show her and all the activities they had planned. But they were also remarkably gentle and considerate, having been carefully prepared by William and their grandparents about their mother's need for continued rest and careful movement. Look, Mummy! Charlotte exclaimed, pointing to the colorful banner they had strung across the front entrance. We made it ourselves, and George helped me spell everything correctly. And I learned 3 new songs while you were away, Louis announced proudly. Papa said I could sing them for you when you're ready. George, ever the protective older brother, seemed to be assessing his mother's condition with a maturity that touched Carole's heart. Are you really feeling better, Mummy? He asked seriously. Because if you need to rest more, we can wait to show you everything. I'm feeling much better, darling, Catherine assured him, ruffling his hair affectionately. And I can't wait to see everything you've all been working on. But maybe we could start slowly and work our way up to the big presentations? The next few hours passed in a gentle whirlwind of homecoming activities. Catherine settled into her favorite chair in the living room, surrounded by her children who seemed determined to make up for 2 weeks of separation. They showed her their artwork, performed songs, read stories, and generally competed for her attention in the most endearing way possible. Carole busied herself in the kitchen, preparing tea and light refreshments while keeping a careful eye on Catherine's energy levels. She could see that her daughter was genuinely thrilled to be home and reunited with her family, but she also noticed the subtle signs of fatigue that indicated the need for rest periods between activities. How are you really feeling? She asked Catherine during a quiet moment when the children were occupied showing William their latest creative projects. Exhausted but happy, Catherine replied honestly. It's wonderful to be home, but I'm definitely more tired than I expected. Everything feels a bit overwhelming after the quiet of the hospital, but in the best possible way. That's completely normal, Carole assured her. It will take time to readjust to the normal chaos of family life. Don't feel like you need to be everything to everyone all at once. As the afternoon progressed, they established a gentle routine that balanced family time with necessary rest periods. Catherine would spend time with the children, then retreat to her bedroom for quiet moments to recharge, then return for more family activities. It was a pattern that seemed to work well for everyone, allowing maximum togetherness while respecting the realities of ongoing recovery. William proved to be particularly attentive to Catherine's needs, having clearly spent considerable time learning about post-surgical care and recovery requirements. He moved easily between entertaining the children and monitoring Catherine's comfort, creating an atmosphere where she could focus on healing without worrying about family logistics. "You've all been amazing," Catherine told her family as they gathered for an early dinner. "I know these past 2 weeks have been difficult for everyone, and I'm so grateful for how well you've all taken care of each other." The dinner conversation was the most normal and relaxed Carole had experienced in weeks. The children chattered about school, friends, and upcoming activities, while the adults discussed practical matters related to Catherine's continued recovery and gradual return to regular routines. "When do you think you'll be able to come to my school concert, Mummy?" Charlotte asked during dessert. "It's not for 3 more weeks, so that should be enough time for you to get completely better, right?" Catherine smiled at her daughter's confident optimism. "I certainly hope so, darling. That's definitely something I want to be well enough to attend." As evening approached and bedtime routines began, Carole could see that Catherine was genuinely tired but also more content and peaceful than she had been since before her surgery. Being home, surrounded by her children and resuming normal family activities, was clearly the best medicine for both her physical and emotional recovery. "Would you like me to help with bedtime tonight?" Carole offered, knowing that the children's usual evening routine might be more tiring than Catherine was ready for. "I'd love to try doing it myself," Catherine replied. "I've missed our bedtime stories and tucking in time so much. But maybe you could stay nearby in case I need backup?" The bedtime routine proceeded smoothly, with each child getting special individual time with their mother. Carole listened from the hallway as Catherine read familiar stories, answered questions about her hospital stay, and provided the comfort and reassurance that only a mother could offer. "Will you have to go back to the hospital, Mummy?" she heard Louis ask during his turn for bedtime attention. "Just for checkup visits to make sure I'm healing properly," Catherine explained patiently. "But I won't have to stay overnight anymore. I'll always come home to you." By the time all 3 children were settled in their beds, Catherine was clearly exhausted but also radiantly happy. The combination of physical tiredness from her first full day of normal activity and emotional satisfaction from being reunited with her family created a peaceful contentment that Carole hadn't seen in her daughter for weeks. "Thank you for everything," Catherine said to her parents as they prepared to leave for their own home. "Having you here during this transition has made all the difference. I don't know how I would have managed without your support." "We'll continue to be here for whatever you need," Carole replied, embracing her daughter goodnight. "Whether it's help with the children, assistance around the house, or just someone to talk to about how you're feeling." The drive home through the dark countryside felt like the completion of a long journey. Carole reflected on everything that had happened since that first terrifying phone call about Catherine's surgery, and she was struck by how much they had all grown through the experience. The crisis had tested their family bonds and revealed their strength. It had shown the children their own resilience and the adults their capacity for supporting each other through difficult times. Most importantly, it had confirmed that love and care were the most powerful medicines available for healing both physical and emotional wounds. "She's really going to be fine now, isn't she?" Carole said to Michael as they pulled into their own driveway. "Better than fine," he replied with confidence. "She's home where she belongs, surrounded by everyone who loves her most. Everything else will follow from there." That night, as Carole prepared for bed in her own familiar surroundings, she felt a profound sense of gratitude for the day's events. Catherine's successful homecoming marked not just the end of a medical crisis, but the beginning of a new appreciation for the ordinary blessings of family life that were so easy to take for granted during normal times. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as Catherine continued her recovery and the family adjusted to their new routines. But tonight, everyone was safely home, together, and filled with hope for the future. For a mother who had spent weeks worrying about her daughter's well-being, there could be no greater gift than the knowledge that the worst was truly behind them and that healing, in all its forms, was well underway. 6 weeks had passed since Catherine's return home from the hospital, and the transformation in her recovery had exceeded everyone's most optimistic expectations. What had begun as a frightening medical crisis had evolved into a period of reflection, family bonding, and renewed appreciation for the fundamental priorities that truly mattered in life. Carole stood in her kitchen on a particularly beautiful March morning, preparing to visit Catherine and the grandchildren for what had become a cherished weekly tradition, Sunday afternoon tea at Adelaide Cottage. These visits had taken on a special significance during Catherine's recovery, providing opportunities for extended family time without the pressures of formal schedules or public obligations. The early signs of spring were everywhere as she looked out at her garden, where daffodils were beginning to bloom and the bare branches of trees showed the first hints of new growth. The symbolism wasn't lost on her. After the dark, uncertain period of Catherine's surgery and initial recovery, there was a sense of renewal and hope that seemed to permeate every aspect of their family life. Michael emerged from his study carrying a book that he had been reading to the grandchildren during recent visits, an adventure story that had become a particular favorite of George's. "Are you ready to hear about young Louis's latest creative project?" he asked with obvious amusement. Apparently he's been working on what he calls a surprise performance for his mother. The grandchildren's continued development and happiness during this period had been one of the most rewarding aspects of the entire experience. Rather than being traumatized by their mother's medical crisis, they seemed to have emerged more confident, more appreciative of family time, and more aware of their own ability to adapt to challenging circumstances. During the drive to Adelaide Cottage, Carole reflected on how dramatically her perspective had shifted over the past 6 weeks. The initial panic and overwhelming fear had given way to a deeper understanding of resilience, both Catherine's remarkable strength throughout her recovery and the family's collective ability to support each other through difficult times. Catherine's progress had been steady and impressive. The physical healing had proceeded exactly as the medical team had predicted, but the emotional and psychological benefits of being home with her family had accelerated her overall recovery in ways that surprised everyone. She moved with increasing confidence, her energy levels had returned to near normal, and, most importantly, the spark of joy and engagement that defined her personality had fully returned. When they arrived at Adelaide Cottage, the scene that greeted them epitomized everything positive about Catherine's recovery journey. She was in the garden with all 3 children, kneeling beside a flower bed where they were planting bulbs for summer blooms. She moved easily and, naturally, without the careful, restricted movements that had characterized the early weeks of her recovery. "Granny! Papa!" the children called out in unison, abandoning their gardening project to race toward their grandparents with dirt-covered hands and grass-stained knees. "Look what we're planting!" Charlotte announced excitedly. "Mummy says they'll be beautiful flowers by the time my birthday comes, and we can pick them for a special bouquet." Catherine stood up gracefully from her gardening position, brushing soil from her hands with a smile that radiated contentment. She looked healthier than she had in months, not just recovered from surgery, but genuinely vibrant and energetic in a way that suggested the enforced rest period had been beneficial beyond its medical necessity. "Perfect timing," she called out as she approached them. "We were just finishing up our gardening project, and I was about to suggest tea in the conservatory." The easy, natural way Catherine moved and interacted with everyone was a joy for Carole to witness. During those dark early days in the hospital, she had worried not just about the immediate medical concerns but about whether her daughter would fully return to her normal, enthusiastic engagement with life. Those fears had proven completely unfounded. The conservatory at Adelaide Cottage had been prepared beautifully for their weekly tea, with comfortable seating arranged to encourage conversation and large windows providing views of the garden where early spring flowers were beginning to bloom. The setting felt peaceful and welcoming, perfect for the kind of relaxed family gathering that had become increasingly precious to everyone involved. "I have some wonderful news to share," Catherine announced as they settled into their seats and William arrived from his own afternoon activities. "I had my final follow-up appointment with the surgical team this week, and they've given me complete clearance to resume all normal activities." The news was greeted with enthusiasm from everyone present, though Carole felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief and joy that Catherine was fully recovered, certainly, but also a bittersweet awareness that this phase of intensive family closeness was coming to an end. "Does that mean you'll be returning to official duties soon?" Michael asked, though his tone suggested he hoped the answer would emphasize gradual transitions rather than immediate resumption of a full schedule. "Gradually," Catherine replied, clearly having given considerable thought to the balance between professional obligations and family priorities. "The palace has been incredibly understanding about allowing me to ease back into things slowly. I'll start with some smaller engagements and work my way back up to a full schedule over the next few months." Louis, who had been patiently waiting for a pause in adult conversation, chose this moment to announce his surprise. "Mummy, I have my performance ready now. Can I show everyone?" The eagerness in his voice was irresistible, and Catherine's delight at his enthusiasm was evident in her expression. "Of course, darling. We'd all love to see what you've been working on." What followed was a charming presentation that combined singing, simple magic tricks, and a brief dramatic reading, all performed with the uninhibited confidence that made Louis such a joy to be around. The performance was received with enthusiastic applause from his audience, and Catherine's laughter at his more comedic moments was the sound of pure maternal happiness. "That was absolutely wonderful," she told him, pulling him into a warm hug. "I'm so impressed with how hard you've been working on that." George and Charlotte, not to be outdone by their younger brother's theatrical success, eagerly shared their own recent accomplishments. Charlotte had been developing her artistic skills and proudly displayed a series of drawings that showed remarkable improvement in technique and creativity. George had been reading increasingly challenging books and gave an enthusiastic summary of his latest adventure novel. Watching Catherine's engagement with each child's individual interests and achievements, Carole was struck by how the experience of serious illness and recovery had seemed to enhance rather than diminish her daughter's appreciation for these ordinary moments of family life. "You seem different somehow," she observed during a quiet moment when the children were occupied with their own activities. "Not just recovered, but somehow more present and engaged than before." Catherine considered the observation thoughtfully before responding. "I think facing something serious like surgery made me realize how much I was taking for granted before. Not just the big things like health and family, but the small daily moments that actually make up most of life. I don't want to lose that perspective as I get busier again." The conversation that followed was one of the most meaningful Carole had shared with her daughter in years. Catherine spoke openly about how the enforced rest period had given her time to think about priorities, about the balance between public obligations and private life, and about the kind of mother and person she wanted to be going forward. "I've been thinking a lot about legacy," Catherine continued. "Not the formal, public kind, but the everyday legacy of how I spend my time and energy. The children won't remember the official engagements I attended or the speeches I gave, but they'll remember whether I was present and engaged with them during these important years." The wisdom and self-awareness in Catherine's reflection impressed Carole deeply. Many people emerged from medical crises simply grateful to return to their previous routines, but Catherine seemed to have used the experience as an opportunity for genuine growth and reconsideration of what mattered most. William joined their conversation, settling into a chair near Catherine with the comfortable familiarity of a couple who had weathered difficulties together and emerged stronger. "She's been amazing throughout this whole experience," he said, looking at his wife with obvious admiration. "Even during the worst days in the hospital, she was thinking about how to make the situation easier for everyone else." "That's just who she is," Carole replied, though she felt a surge of maternal pride at the recognition of Catherine's character. Even as a little girl, she was always more concerned about other people's comfort than her own. The afternoon progressed with the kind of easy, unstructured family time that had become increasingly precious during Catherine's recovery. There were games with the children, discussions about upcoming spring activities, and comfortable silences where everyone simply enjoyed being together without any agenda or schedule to maintain. As the sun began to set and the time for departure approached, Carole found herself reluctant to end these weekly gatherings. They had become such an important part of the rhythm of recovery and family connection, and she worried that Catherine's return to full official duties might make such extended family time more difficult to arrange. "I hope we can continue these Sunday visits even after things get busier," she said to Catherine as they began gathering their belongings. "I hope so too," Catherine replied, though her expression suggested she understood the challenges that lay ahead. "These afternoons have been some of my favorite parts of the recovery process. I don't want to lose this feeling of being completely present with family." The children's farewell was typically enthusiastic, with promises about next week's visit and excited chatter about spring activities they were planning together. Their resilience and adaptability throughout the entire experience had been remarkable, and they seemed to have emerged from the challenging period with even stronger family bonds. During the drive home, Carole reflected on the conversation with Catherine about priorities and presence. The crisis had been frightening and difficult, but it had also created opportunities for deeper connection and more intentional family time that might not have occurred under normal circumstances. "She really has grown from this experience, hasn't she?" Michael observed as they drove through the countryside in the gathering dusk. "In the most beautiful way," Carole agreed. "I think facing something serious like that surgery helped her clarify what really matters to her. Not everyone emerges from a crisis with that kind of wisdom." Over the following weeks, as Catherine gradually resumed her official duties, Carole watched with interest to see how her daughter would balance her renewed appreciation for family time with the demanding requirements of royal life. The initial engagements were carefully chosen and thoughtfully scheduled, allowing Catherine to rebuild her stamina while maintaining the priorities she had identified during recovery. The first official appearance was at a children's hospital, an engagement that felt particularly meaningful given Catherine's recent experience as a patient. Carole watched the coverage on television and was struck by how natural and engaged Catherine appeared, clearly drawing on her own recent experiences to connect authentically with patients and families. "She looks wonderful," Michael commented as they watched together. "Confident and energetic, but also somehow more grounded than before." The media coverage of Catherine's return to public duties was overwhelmingly positive, with commentators noting her apparent vitality and the genuine warmth she displayed in her interactions. But, more importantly to Carole, Catherine seemed to be managing the balance successfully, maintaining her commitment to family priorities while fulfilling her professional obligations. The Sunday tea tradition continued, though sometimes adjusted for Catherine's schedule. The children adapted easily to occasional changes in routine, seeming to understand that their mother's work was important while also knowing that family time remained a priority. During one of these later visits, Catherine shared that she had been asked to take on a new patronage focused on supporting families dealing with medical crises. "I feel like I have something meaningful to contribute now," she explained. "Not just sympathy, but real understanding of what families go through during these difficult times." The opportunity seemed perfect for Catherine's particular combination of personal experience, natural empathy, and public platform. Carole could envision her daughter bringing comfort and support to other families facing the kind of challenges they had recently navigated themselves. As spring progressed and Catherine's full schedule resumed, the family settled into new rhythms that reflected the lessons learned during the recovery period. There was more intentionality about family time, more appreciation for ordinary moments, and a greater awareness of the importance of health and presence over productivity and achievement. Looking back on the entire experience months later, Carole realized that what had begun as one of the most frightening periods of her life as a mother had ultimately strengthened their family in unexpected ways. The crisis had revealed depths of resilience and love that might have remained untested under normal circumstances. Catherine's surgery and recovery had reminded everyone that life's most precious gifts were often the simplest ones: health, family, presence, and love. The tears that Carole had shed during that first emotional hospital visit had been the beginning of a journey that deepened her appreciation for her daughter's strength, her family's bonds, and the profound meaning found in caring for those we love during their most vulnerable moments. The experience had changed them all, but in ways that felt like growth rather than loss, wisdom rather than trauma. Catherine emerged not just physically healed but emotionally enriched, with a clearer understanding of her priorities and a deeper appreciation for the ordinary blessings that made life meaningful. For Carole, the period had reinforced her understanding that being a mother never ended, regardless of her children's ages or circumstances. The privilege of providing comfort, support, and unconditional love during difficult times remained one of life's greatest honors and responsibilities. As she watched Catherine return to full engagement with her official duties while maintaining her commitment to family priorities, Carole felt profound satisfaction that the frightening medical crisis had ultimately led to positive changes for everyone involved. The tears she had shed in fear and worry had been transformed into tears of gratitude and pride for her daughter's remarkable strength and the family's ability to weather life's storms together.